Alright friends, so let's get started. Now I assume that you have cloned the Git repository that I provided in the description of the last video, and if you have not, you can visit the link, and over here you can click on the code button and download it as a zip, or you can copy this Git repository link, and in your terminal, like in your IDE, I'm using Visual Studio Code right now, and you can basically pass in the command of git clone and the link of the directory, and you can specify the project name as well. Anyway, I have cloned the Git repository, and after cloning it, you need to install the packages as well, because if you check the package.json, we can see that there are a few dependency that we need to install first. So in order to do that, you can npm install in the terminal, and that will basically install all the different packages. And after doing that, like after all the packages have been installed, you can pass in the command of npm start, which is basically going to start our React application. Now I have already cloned the Git repository, I have installed the packages, and I have started the React application as well. And as you can see, you will be getting something like this. So before we dive into the code, let's look at what the repository has. So firstly, inside the source directory, you can see a theme folder. Now this theme is basically the theme that we will be using for our application. And inside in the outer folder, you can see the app.js, which has a basic structure which is being displayed over here, and the dummy data which we will be using for before we connect to the Firebase and fetch the different jobs. So this is the local state that we will be using. Anyway, so let's begin with this. And over here, this is the final application that we will develop. So firstly, let's develop this particular header banner, which has the text of open job listing as well as this button. Alright, so let's get started. In the box, the first thing that we should do, like when we are working with material UI library, is to basically implement the theme that we have. And to do that, we can use the theme provider from the from the material UI library, which basically allows us to implement a theme of our own, like what we want to work with. And you can do that by passing in the theme prop and specify the theme that we have. So that's gonna auto import, I guess, and we can do that by theme. Alright, so it is basically importing the theme out of inside the theme folder that we have. Now let's look at the theme first before we jump into the header. And in this, we are basically exporting the default export is basically the return value of this function. Now create MUI theme is basically a function in which you pass in your custom styling or functionalities or different configuration, you can say. So it is using typography, and it is setting the font family, like the default one, as Poppins. Now I have already included the Google font for Poppins, as you can see in the HTML file. So that's why the Poppins the Poppins font will be used as default. Now over here we can see the palette. Now in here we have two palettes for now, the primary and the secondary one, and we have the values over here. Now we have overrides. Now overrides basically means that if you need to override some CSS styling of any particular the component that we get from the material UI library, you can use this prop and specify the component that you want to customize, and you can provide the custom CSS for it as well. So that's it in the theme one, and this function basically returns back the theme that we can use in a theme provider. So that's what we are doing over here, and let's get started. Now the header part, this one, let's make a separate component for this, and we can do that by going in a source folder and creating a new directory called components, and within it we can have header. Now the way the convention I like to work with is separating each component in a folder, and inside the folder we can have an index.js. So that kind of gives us back the main component, and you can have the sub components within that folder which are used in that index.js. I know that may not be easy to get at the very start, but let's work with it. And over here inside the header folder, that's inside the components, we are creating an index.js. Now what we can do is we need to import the React first of all library, and let's import few components from the material UI library, which are box, grid, typography, and button. So these four we will be using, and let's just export default, our functional component. So the way we should structure this header is basically like, as you can see that there is a dark background to this one. However, the contents within that container are kind of aligned at the very, like in the center. And in order to do that, we can use the box component, which kind of lays the, one second, we can use, like we do not need to hold any state, so we can directly return back the JSX, and we can do box. And inside that box we can have a grid container. Now the purpose of it, let me just type in, like let me just place in the components first, so that I can explain you the reason for using the grid component. And we can have the same text of open job listing inside of here, and we can provide a variant to the typography, like which component that we want to use, like the HTML one, and we can use H5. So that will work. And the next thing that we require is this button, and we can do that as well using the button component from the library. And that's basically post a job, and we will set the click listener later on. So by far, like if we save this and import this header over here, which it should auto import. Now as you can see that we are importing the header from the components directory that we created, and inside of it from the header. Now as you can see that if you have an index.js inside a folder, you do not need to you don't need to refer it, because if you have something like this, it implies that it will use that index.js within that folder. That's pretty like this how the HTML works, exact same thing. So if we save this, and I think I made a typo, okay, that's double quotes over here. And if we save this, let's see what do we have. Now as you can see that we have the typography component as well as the button. So let's work. And at first let's just give some background color to the box which is containing these two components, and we can do that by passing in a prop to the box component, which is of BG color, and you can specify whatever color value that you want to provide. Now in the theme that we have right over here, it basically, like we have two we have two colors, the primary and the secondary one. And the primary one is kind of like an aqua color, like the sky blue color, and the secondary one is the darker color. So we want to use the secondary one, and we can use that in the BG color by first targeting the secondary, like we want to use a secondary color, and inside of it we want to use the main one. And let me just place it over there. So just by doing this, we will be having the darker color, but we will still need to fix few things. So firstly, like we can change the color of the text within this box by passing in the color prop as well, and we can specify what color that we want it to have. So by passing in the white color, it will turn into like just like this. Now the other thing that we want to do is we want to change the styling of this button. Now it's not at all visible, as you can see, it's not at all visible. And if we check the theme, now by the way, this theme that we are like creating over here, it kind of overrides the default theme. So like even if you make some custom changes, it will kind of override with the default theme that the material UI comes with. So you can use both, like you can combine them both and make some specific customization as you wish to. Now over here in the theme, we can see that we have some custom changes on the MUI button, and basically what we can do is inside the button we can change the variant to be of contained. So that's going to give it some color, and like if we save it right now, it will be having the default white color over here. Now we can change the color by specifying any like particular color that we want, and we can choose the primary color that we already have inside the theme, and we can just pass in the color that we want it to have, and it should be getting the sky blue color. That's perfect. Now it's not visible over here, maybe you can, that there is a little what do we call it, the box shadow for this button, and we can remove that shadow by passing in a prop called disable elevation. So that's gonna remove the box shadow on the button, and yeah, now it's looking flat and nice. So let's just figure out like how we can kind of shift the elements. Like firstly, we need to add some padding to this box, because it's kind of aligned to the very top and it kind of like constrained together. So what we can do is in the box we can pass in some padding by passing in a P prop. So this P basically adds padding in all direction. However, what we want to do is we want to give the padding only at the top and the bottom. So we can do that by passing PY, so that add padding to the Y axis and whatever padding that we want to give. So for example, if we give in 10, so that's gonna add 10. Now this 10 basically will be multiplied, like whatever value that you specify will be multiplied by 8 pixels, and that's how the material UI library works. Now I would not go deeper into that, and basically all these things, like however it may be new to you, but that's we are kind of scratching the very surface of it, and actually have the upcoming course which covers all these things in depth. So anyway, for now it's adding padding to all, like on the top and the bottom. And now what we need to do is we need to align these items at the center and kind of frame, have them in like a fixed width. And we can do that by using the grid component that wraps the both components, the typography and the button. And we can have the grid component of type container. Now this container will be wrapping both these components, and inside that container, because now like when you pass in the container prop to the grid component, it basically lays out a 12 column grid layout, and we can use those 12 columns by having a grid component of type item, and we will wrap these two components as well inside that. And now we can specify how much like columns we want this grid item to take, and we can say that it should take about 10 columns out of the 12 columns laid out by the container. And now it won't make much difference in like visually, as you can see. In order to do that, like in order to align the items, what we need to do is in the container, the grid component of type container, we can pass in the justify and about center. So that's gonna align the elements like the grid item to the center. Now what we need to do is like inside this, firstly let me just change the variant of job listing to be of H4, because over here we have something like bigger than that. So now it's looking perfect. And there are different ways to kind of fix this, like align them accordingly, like as we want. Like we can use a grid container inside the item, or we can like make this an item and also container. But the option that I would like go with is using a box component. So we can basically wrap these two components again in a box, and we can say that the box component, which is basically a div element, an HTML div element, and we're saying that it should have a display of flex. So just by doing this, like these two items should be sitting on next to each other. So that's good. Now what we need to do is like firstly we need to add some spacing in between these two components, and what we can do is we can pass in the justify content, which aligns the item on the main axis, and we can say space between. So both of them will be having equal spaces in between. So that's great, exactly what we wanted. And so I think that's for this particular video. And just a side note on this create MUI theme one, basically this theme, like the material UI actually comes with a default theme which has a set of different rules and some like the styling custom, kind of the default styling and some different properties, you can say. Now what we are doing using this create MUI theme is that the value that you're providing in this create MUI theme, the object basically, it will override these values. And however the values that you do not provide, like the values that you do not want to customize, they will use the default theme. It will kind of merge both these, like both the themes together. So that's perfect for our case. Anyhow, so in the next video we will work on the this search one. So let's